First of all, thank you all so much for coming out for our Teaching with Technology Lunch and Learn series. This is the first session that we're having. On the back of your papers, we put the schedule for all of the other events that we're going to be having on Tuesdays so that you know what's going on. And if you don't know me, my name is Melanie. I'm the program assistant here at the Center for Second Language Studies, and we are very lucky today. We have two visitors that are coming from the Student Access Services Office, Jamie and William, and they're going to be talking with us today about the Americans with Disabilities Act, about accessibility, and about how we can use technology to make our classrooms and our lesson plans more accessible and inclusive. So if you will all join me in welcoming Jamie and William. Thank you so much for coming.
All right. Thank you all. We're really excited to be here. I'll just get us started. And really the reason why I think that we all have these conversations is because we are legally mandated to. But not only is that the case, but it's also a way to make sure that everyone that we serve has access to their education or materials. A lot of that comes down just because of lawsuits that are brought on. That's how we find more ways to be more inclusive. So if someone may say, well, I don't have access to this. If I file a lawsuit, OCR says, oh yeah, you should have access to this. And then, a new kind of rule is put into place. So that way we can then kind of format our regulations. So the ADA, it's a really long act, it's a Civil Rights Act, but what it says is that we can't discriminate against people with disabilities, and so overall there's just no discrimination is the short end of it. Is 504? Yes, okay. Okay, so there are two different pieces of the ADA. There's the differences between Title II and Title III schools. Title II are those schools that receive federal funding, public institutions that receive federal funding. Title III are going to be your private organizations. Now, oddly enough, like Vanderbilt University is a private school, but we receive tons of federal dollars, so we really fall under Title II because we have that federal funding. Title III is really there to cover those private schools that maybe have like an extra income of $50. They're not they don't have the extra money in any way. And so really the only difference then is it's not that they don't have to provide accommodations, it's just that they have to make it truly accessible. Whereas in Title II, you want to make the accommodation not only accessible, but how the person prefers having that accommodation. So if you have someone who is blind and they have been used to reading items by Braille, and they come to Vanderbilt and they're like, well, I want all my textbooks in Braille, even though it's so much more cost effective and probably quicker to just play it digitally so they can listen to it and technically have access. They're used to reading by Braille, and that's how they learn best. We would put those books into Braille for them. So just the kind of differences. Most, if you're in schools, most institutions do fall under Title II, unless, again, like you're those small private schools. Oh, and lastly, there's an important point on here. University model is based on access and not success. That's a really big piece. Who's looking into going to teaching at university level? Quite a few. Okay. So the difference is in K through 12, if you have, let's say, a math-based learning disability, your math teacher might say, oh, the student should only do half the math problems because it's going to take them a little bit longer. We kind of want to help push them along. When you get to college, everyone is required to do the same amount of work. You're required to live up to the same standards. You just may have an accommodation. So that student may just have extra time to do the math problems rather than cutting them in half. So everyone does the same work at the college level. We just essentially want to provide access to the student, but we're not going to make them be successful. So, big point. So the second big civil rights law is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And what this one says is that if you receive federal funding, you have to create accessible programs. Almost, again, all schools receive federal funding, and so therefore we need to make sure that we're providing accessible programming. There is a line in there that says if it's an undue financial burden, you don't have to move forward with it. However, it doesn't look at the department's budget, it looks at the university budget on a whole, which again, with the amount of funding most universities receive, they'll have the budget to create an accommodation. So section 508 is also talking about accessibility, but this comes into terms of communication. And this became really big when we started realizing that websites weren't accessible. And so people with vision impairments were not able to access information on the World Wide Web. And that's a huge technology communicator that we have now. And so with section 508, a lot of mandates have been put into place to make sure that our websites are accessible. Really anything that you put online in terms of videos, any digital technology needs to be accessible as well. And Bill's going to talk a lot more about that because I think that's what this conversation revolves around today. So our office is here to provide accommodations. We say that accommodations are provided when barriers exist. So if a student cannot access something, let's go with something with like dyslexia. Is everyone familiar with dyslexia? It is the difficulty reading. Your brain can kind of mix up letters and how they're shaped and formed. So the barrier might be that a professor hands that student a textbook. The student may not be able to read that textbook easily, and so, or at the rate of their peers. And so what we do is we can help transform that book into an accessible format or a digital format, if it isn't already available. What's great about textbooks is now a lot of them are becoming digital files and ebooks, which is helpful. But if there is a barrier present, that's what our accommodation or our office is there for. A student will come in and request accommodations, and we're there to help provide that for them. I put on here attitudinal barriers too, just because sometimes, you know, professors and instructors, that tends to be the barrier. They're the one who's kind of stopping the student from getting those accommodations. They press the student. Sometimes really hard to prove themselves as to why they need an accommodation, or they question why accommodations are there. And that's one thing that we're trying to kind of get away from, and just as long as faculty know that if a student has an accommodation letter, there's definitely a reason for them to have it. They have substantial limitations, and if it's a faculty member at our office, we let them know that we're here to talk with them about it and how to help implement those accommodations. Some of our accommodations that you can see here: extra time, audio format, and absences. So sometimes like students who have chronic illnesses or chronic mental health impairments, they may need to be absent for a couple days at a time. We can help work with absences in the classroom too. And then a lot of people say that they want to be inclusive to all students. And so I say if you have an accessible course, you're going to be inclusive to those with disabilities at least. It may not be everyone, but if you want to be inclusive, be accessible, and at least you're including one group of students right there.
Okay, so I want to talk about what is this word accessible, because in the disability field we always want things to be accessible, but you might not know what to picture. So somebody shout out, what is accessible in your mind? What is something that is accessible? Failure is an option. Just throw something out. What do you picture when you think of something that is accessible?
Something physical.
Okay, like what? What's something that's physical and accessible?
A plate.
A plate,
Something
yes.
that's physical.
Yeah, yeah. Almost everybody can use a plate in the world. What about something at the grocery store that is designed to be accessible? I'll give you a hint. When you walk in.
The doors.
I'm thinking of the doors. Because carts, they might not work for everybody. There are motorized carts, and those are designed to be accessible. I can go with that. But yeah, sliding doors are designed to be accessible for everybody. Almost everybody in the world should be able to walk up to that door. They open for you, you walk through. That's designed with accessibility in mind. So let's talk about our office, who we serve. We could have students that are registered with us that have autism. They could have chronic illnesses, hearing loss, deafness, and intellectual disability, learning disability, memory loss, mental health, physical disability, speech language disorder, vision loss, blindness. And so when you hear the word disability, you might have someone or a stereotype that comes into your mind, but we really serve a huge variety of students on campus. So when we talk about teaching materials or information being accessible, here's the definition. Accessible is defined as individuals with disabilities able to independently acquire the same information, like Jamie talked about, engage in the same interactions, enjoy the same services within the same time frame as individuals without disabilities, with substantially equivalent ease of use. And so that last part's the tricky part. How can we get access that's in the same time frame and it's equivalent in the way that it's accessed? And we're going to talk about how to add in the accessibility piece to documents and different things that you design. But that's really why our office exists, is to try to help the university get things in an accessible format that pretty much everyone can use. Alright, so we talked about those sliding doors, and that really is where the term universal design applies. Those sliding doors are designed to be universally accessible. So I'll read out the definition here. The concept of designing all products and the built environment to be aesthetic and usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone, regardless of their age, ability, or status in life. And I'm pretty sure this definition comes from, Jamie, you worked in North Carolina?
Yeah.
Universal design.
Ron Mace.
Yeah, that concept of universal design comes from a guy in North Carolina that thought about these products are really being designed for everyone from the outset. And so that's how you want to think about the things that you're designing. Am I designing this with an inherent barrier, or am I designing it with a broader people group in mind? Alright, so universal design for learning, how would that be different? Let me read out this definition. A set of principles for curriculum development that give all individuals equal opportunity to learn. Also a blueprint for creating instructional goals, methods, materials, and assessments that work for everyone. Not just a single one-size-fits-all solution, but rather flexible approaches that can be customized and adjusted for individual needs. And so if you think of just like the cookie cutter assessment at the end of a unit, it's usually on a Scantron, it's usually the person has 30 minutes to complete it. That's kind of like the cookie cutter one-size-fits-all approach to assessment. And universal design says, why do we have to do it that way? Yeah, it's convenient to run a bunch of Scantrons through a machine, but is it working for everybody? Alright, so in this picture, we have a tall person, medium-sized person, short person, and they're all on a box. Uh-oh. Yes, they're all in a box, watching a baseball game, and some people are being excluded. So my question is this equality? Give me a thumbs up if it's equality. Is everyone receiving the same thing?
No.
Yeah, everybody's getting the box, but not everybody's getting to see the game. So maybe not true equality. Alright, so is this equality where the tall person can see over the fence just fine, the medium-sized person gets one box because that makes it able to be seen, 2 boxes for the short person? Is this equality?
Yeah.
Thumbs up? Yeah, everybody is not getting the same thing, but the end goal of seeing the baseball game, that's being achieved, and so that would be equality. This is not universal design, however. This is an accommodation approach, like Jamie talked about. The smaller person needs 2 boxes, accommodate them with 2 boxes. Medium size needs 1 box, accommodation. Tall person doesn't need anything, they're fine. Alright, so now, think about this. Is this universal design, where it's been designed where everyone gets the same thing and it works for everybody? Yeah. The chain link fence, it serves the purpose that the fence served in protecting people, but everybody can see through it. And so if you want to think about, all right, am I designing my materials in the chain link fence way? Can everybody get to the end product and it still function for everybody? All right, there's a guy named Tom Tobin. I think he's Canadian. I've heard him speak a couple times, and he's just somebody that is really pushing universal design for learning, and he's come up with these 5 tenets. And so I'll read these, and you can think about how does this apply to my content, my course, if you're teaching a course. Start with text. And so text is really the lowest common denominator. If you want to create materials where you're creating videos, you're creating interactive design, that's amazing, and that can work really well for a lot of students. But what about the students that can't hear it, can't see it? It may not work for that person. And so if you're starting with text, if you're typing out a transcript for what you're going to say in the video, you can send out that transcript because the text is fully accessible to pretty much everybody. If you can't see what's being said, then you can read it where the computer reads everything out loud. If you cannot hear what's being said in the video, you can read the text transcript and you can still access the information. And so starting with text is one of those chain link fences where everybody can access the text. Make alternatives for media. It's kind of going back to what I was saying about videos. If you want to make that video, you could also have a podcast recording of the same ideas, but a different format. And I will say, pure accessibility-wise, for audio, you do want to have that text transcript for somebody that can't hear the audio. For video, you do want to have captions on that video to create the universal design. And then another piece that a lot of people don't think about with videos is what's being visually presented. And if I can't see what's being visually presented, can I hear everything that's being visually presented? Because if I'm doing a screencast and I'm saying, okay, go up here to the top right and click, and then we're going to come down here to the middle, do this drop down, I don't know what you're clicking on. So you have to think about, am I saying everything that I'm showing? All right, middle point here. Let students demonstrate knowledge in their own way. Kind of like I was talking about that cookie cutter assessment. Think outside the box when it comes to assessments. Can you have people record audio and give that to you as their assessment, as their response? Can you have them create a video? You know, it's a rich multimedia world these days, so can you have people demonstrate knowledge in different ways? The fourth point, break tasks down into components, really hits people with learning disabilities that process things differently or slowly. When you break things down, you're really designing in that chain link fence way where it's going to work for everybody, or at least hopefully it will, because the human brain processes things in segments. And so we really need to think about breaking our processes down for students. And then the last one, create recordings and walkthroughs. And that's where I was talking about when you do a screen recording of you doing something on your computer, you can talk people through it with your voice. But in doing that, be super descriptive. All right, I'm going to come over here to the sign in link, click sign in. Then we're going to come over here to the username drop down, click, look for my username, click it, click sign in. So be descriptive, include captions, include transcripts. Okay, so now we talked about universal design for learning and how we can kind of create things with a chain link fence mindset where everyone can access it. But sometimes there are just inherent barriers because of a disability. So if I can't see something, I still need to know it's there. And so the easiest example is when you put an image into a document or into a website, that document has to have a description kind of embedded into the document. And when you do that, it's called alternative text description. And so there are different ways to do it in different programs. but Microsoft Word, you can insert alt text. Web, you can insert alt text. PowerPoint, PDF, all these programs have ways to insert that alt text into an image, because otherwise it's just either going to, the text-to-speech that reads everything out loud, it's either going to ignore that image so that the person cannot perceive it, or it's going to say graphic, 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 and you'll be like, okay, that doesn't help me. So yeah, that first one, provide text alternatives, that's what we just talked about, so that it can be changed into other forms that people need, such as large print, braille, speech, symbols, simpler language. The speech is what we just talked about, speech to text. Alternatives for time-based media, that would be the captioning that we talked about. Speaking of time, it may be on another slide. Another thing to think about when you're designing is we talked about that 30-minute cap on quizzes. If that quiz cap, time cap, is not necessary, open it up. That universal design for learning. You can do this in your own time as long as you get it done. And that's kind of how, when you get a real job, works. Get it done. I'm not going to be on top of you. Get it done. And so you can kind of open up time restraints for students. All right. Fillable forms. If you have students fill anything out in the second language center, you do need to think about, can all of our students fill those forms out by themselves? Independently would be key there. And then kind of the most difficult situation is when somebody can't see that form. They need to be able to still access the information in the form. So if you rely on paper forms, that doesn't work for somebody that can't see it. They have to have somebody fill it out for them. If you go to a digital form, that's a step better, but it can still be inaccessible, especially if it's just a scanned, you feed it through a copier scanner, then you post it on the web. It's just going to say image or graphic. Really, it needs to be designed, forms need to be designed to be accessible in Microsoft Word, Adobe InDesign, there are different formats. One of my favorites is designing things on the web, because really a lot of these, actually this framework is built on the web, because the web is the most widely used application in the world, and so that's where a lot of the groundwork for accessibility has been laid. Alright, last point here for make information is perceivable. Make it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating foreground from background. So if I have some vision, but I have limited vision, it's going to be difficult for me to tell the difference between gray and white. And so if I darken that gray to black, it becomes way easier for me to see the foreground against the background. So that's just to say, if you like playing with colors in your presentations, make sure that they're bold and they stand out against each other. Alright, so we talked about perceivable. This is our operable. Make sure that everything that you want people to use is operable. And a good basis for that is if you can access everything in that interface with a keyboard, then that's great. Because if I don't have vision, a mouse is not going to help me. So I'm going to use a keyboard only. If I have a motor impairment, kind of the same thing. Keyboard can be how I get around the computer. And so you can start getting around your interfaces that you expect students to get around by using the tab key to tab around. You can use arrow keys to move around, space bar and enter to activate things. And so you can start to get a feel of, is this possible for me to get around? Yep, here's that one we just talked about. Provide users enough time to read and use content. So you don't want to design your content in a way that excludes some people because they have that processing disorder or just it takes longer. And so try to open up those time frames. The third one, don't design content in a way that causes seizures. And the easiest way to think about that is like flashing. Just get rid of it if possible. If you just have to have content that flashes a lot, you can put some kind of trigger warning, disclaimer. If you have seizure disorder, stay away from this. We'll find you an alternative. The last one on this slide, provide ways to help users navigate find content, determine where they are. And that really comes back to those labels, like we talked about alternative text descriptions for images. Make sure that everything you put in there has a label so that people, when they get to it, know, okay, this is a form field. And not just know that it's a form field, it's where I put my name, and so it needs to say name. And I realize some of this is getting more in depth than you're going to design, but I just want you to know the framework. Alright, we want to make sure that everyone can understand what we're designing. And so make text content readable and understandable. That goes back to when you scan something in, and this is across the campus, even 2019, we'll scan something through a scanner copier, email it out, and it's just images of text. And you want to stay away from images of text. If you have to use images of text, you can get software that will scan that image of a page and kind of extract the real text from it so that the software for people with disabilities can read it out loud. That's possible. The easier way is to keep it digital rather than images of text. And then the last one, make web pages appear and operate in predictable ways. You might not be designing web pages, but it's the same thing. Make sure that people can understand it, operate it, perceive it. The last thing is just think ahead when you're designing. A good example here is, you know, that shift from old style web pages to mobile responsive web pages that's taken place over the last 10 years. That shift considered people with disabilities in a lot of instances, and so you don't want to leave behind when you're designing for the future. Just be thinking about, okay, how's this going to work for the broader perspective? Alright, so how does this apply to you? If you design web pages, or if you design resources such as emails, tutorials, workshop materials, you give presentations, be thinking about, okay, can everyone perceive this information? Can everyone operate it? Can everyone understand it? Is it robust? A real culprit right here is emails where we send out information to a huge variety of people. And a lot of times we'll get somebody to graphically design something that looks really nice, a flyer. So we'll email out that flyer. But again, that's text inside an image. So be thinking about, okay, if somebody gets this and they can't see it, it's just going to say graphic. And so what I recommend in that situation is duplicate, like type it out underneath the image so that everyone can access the information. Because you probably noticed in your email client that sometimes it'll block an image automatically, but the text will still show up just fine. So you may double your attendance. Who knows? Alright, how does this apply to you indirectly? If you're purchasing supplies, think about people with disabilities. If you are working collaboratively on projects, think about, okay, what kind of technologies work well in a big sense for people. Support the infrastructure. I'll skip that one for now. And then support those creating resources. So you will teach other people how to create materials, and so you can pass this information on to them. And then we're really hoping that at Vanderbilt we can increase awareness, which includes understanding what access means. Give me a thumbs up if you understand what access means now. That's a pretty good percentage. And then you want to know what questions to ask, and then understand the answers that are given. And so if you see an email being designed and there's no text underneath it, you can ask, hey, did you put alt text onto this image? Did you embed alt text into the image before it goes out so that it gets to a wider variety of people? And then use the basic principles of accessible design where and when possible. I do want to share some tools with you before we go. On campus, we use Omni Update. I don't know if anybody's creating web pages on campus for your department, but Omni Update has an accessibility checker built into it, so check that out. D2L is also called Brightspace, So if you put anything into Brightspace, it has an accessibility checker built into it. It's only in the piece of Brightspace where you choose new file and you create kind of a new web page within D2L. It's not going to check your PDFs, it's not going to check your Word documents, but it can check that HTML page that you're designing in Brightspace. And then Microsoft Word has an accessibility checker built into it. PDFs, if you have Acrobat Pro, has an accessibility checker built into it. Image editors, don't remember what I meant by that, but somebody tell me what you need to do with images. What do you need to include with images?
Text.
Thank you. We'll go with that. All right, video. Somebody tell me, what do you need to include when you send out videos? Captions, yes. And what's the other consideration with videos? Transcripts, yes. That kind of goes with captions. What was the thing I said if you can't see the content of video? Yeah. Yeah, a really vivid description. Well put. All right, so this is it. You can help Vanderbilt move from awareness to a commitment to a culture of accessibility through this process of dialogue. Anything to wrap up with?
No, I love that. And that's right where we want to be and where we want to start. So it starts with you all.
Do you all have time for some questions?
Absolutely.
All right, well, I have questions, but I won't be selfish, so does anybody want to ask something? A burning question about accessibility?
So I came in just a few minutes late, I apologize. But if I've created some type of activity or some content for my class and I'm not sure exactly if it is completely accessible, does your office would assist with that? So could I say, okay, I'm setting up this, I've designed this material for class, but I want to make sure it's accessible. Have I done all these things? And I like these assessment tools and productivity tools I could use, but is there a way that somebody could, because I think if I could create the material and then have it maybe reviewed by someone who really knew these tips and techniques and strategies for making it most accessible, then I could maybe get some practice at it and okay, I'll remember that next time to include text here or large font here. You know, I think where I want to commit to this. I think I would probably need help getting through like the first few to where I just start to remember it. It becomes more of my, pattern with making these types of things.
Jamie's my boss. I'm going to let her speak for my time.
So right now, if you were to say, can you check for this, we'd probably say, send it to your student, have a student check for it.
Okay.
Bill is the only one working right now on our accessible materials. We're trying to grow our team members, and we really want to be there especially for our faculty to say, hey, yeah, let us check things for you. Let us make all these changes for you. If the faculty member is thinking about accessibility, that's huge. We are more than happy to see that, and it makes us actually really excited. But right now we would probably say, hey, make sure give it to your students. If someone says it's not accessible, let us know, and we can help you get to that point. I hope in a couple of years from now, or I know some other universities are able to currently to do just that. To say, hey, can you check for this? And they'll check it for you to let you know if anything needs changed. If it does, they may change it or help you do it, and then kind of move on to the next one. So it really depends on what school you're at, where you're going.
Okay.
But right now we cannot.
Okay.
I had a question. So we actually have a website in-house that we have been building, and we are very excited about creating the culture of accessibility on our website. So we have very recently darkened the text on our website, and we have added alt text to all of our images. As we are receiving new project submissions for our website, we're going to be adding alt text to those. Could you give us some idea of what a useful alt text description includes? So it's just kind of boy, or should it be boy looking at the ocean? Or, how
I can speak to that.
descriptive should
Yeah.
it be?
the way that I like to think about it is if I'm the person that can't see it, what would be beneficial to me? What would matter to me? If the ocean is really why that picture is in there, then you could mention boy next to the ocean. And so another way to think about it is you could insert a picture of a koala into your document that you want to give out to your students just because you really like koalas. And so the alt text for that could be koala. If you're teaching biology and all of the students are seeing that and they really start to understand, okay, the koala is doing this because of this, then you really need to start to be more descriptive and get to the heart of why did you put that image in there and what do you expect people to get out of it. You don't want to explain too much in alt text. You do want to leave some room for interpretation, but you want to be explicit and descriptive.
I have another question. I guess because I've been working on the website, I have a lot of questions. I don't know whether I need like my visual aid here. So we have on our website something that says like, we use Creative Commons for details. Visit, and then I think right now it says here, and this is hyperlinked. What is the best formatting for hyperlinks in order to try to make it as accessible as possible?
Yep, I can speak to that too. The assistive software that reads everything out loud for somebody that can't see it has the ability to pull all the links off of a page so that you can just go down through them. And so if you hear, here, you're going to be like, where is this going to take me? And so what I would do with this link is we use Creative Commons, maybe not even have for details visit here, just hyperlink Creative Commons so that somebody would know, oh, it's going to take me to more information about Creative Commons. And that's called a descriptive link. The link describes where it's going.
Do you have any websites that you would recommend to us outside of the Omni update, or could we access Omni update to run our website through to find out the points that we can improve on?
I think it's the universities,
Okay.
like how they're set, because I know we're on Omni Update, like our office is run by Omni Update, but I know there are some offices on campus that are still use WordPress. So I think it's just the provider
Okay.
that's been chosen, because I know there's some of them have different formats.
Okay, because I've been running ours through like, adahelper.org or something like that. Are those somewhat useful? They give a lot of details about
An easy
things.
to use one. There's a plugin for Chrome and Firefox called WAVE, Wave, and it's an easy, just click the button.
Wave is like WordPress, I think so.
WAVE?
Yeah.
The one I'm thinking of is an accessibility checker.
Okay.
And so while you're designing that page, you go into the view that everyone would view, not the content creator view, just the public view. Click that button, WAVE, and it would give you a list of things that do and don't work well.
I have more questions if you'll do. I have a lot of questions. If we have a video or a recording that we want to use in our classes and it does not already have transcripting, is there a tool or a website that you would recommend for generating those transcripts? Or do we need to just type?
If it's your video, what I like to do is upload it into YouTube because YouTube has an automatic caption feature. And you don't have to make that video public or viewable by anybody. You can just keep it in your YouTube account, have it process the audio and create captions for you, and then just go into YouTube. And it even has a caption editor in YouTube so that you can go and correct the automated transcript caption. And it works really well.
Cool, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know where that is in YouTube? Like under what?
It's just like you upload your video.
Yeah, but like, do you have to click on like settings or something, or?
I think it's called
YouTube
YouTube.
automatically does it for you.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's called YouTube Studio. That's
Oh,
like
yeah.
their maker side of YouTube.
So I just want to ask a question. Do you have any idea where one can get Acrobat Pro?
I know you
Through
can get it.
Vanderbilt?
Yeah, you can get it through the license. You can get it through the university for a reduced fee. That's the only place that I know of that would be better than just getting it on your own.
Any other questions? I know that somebody had asked us at one point about how we can create an environment in our classroom that helps people that maybe have social anxieties or have anxiety. Do you have any tips for best practices for how we can do that?
I think one of the best things to do, just in general, is on the first day of your classes, is just addressing disability to begin with, and just letting students know if they have any disabilities, to let them know that you're open to talking about them and talking about maybe if any accommodations are needed. And then if they are social anxieties, ask them what are those anxieties, what may cause the anxiety to kind of climb up, or what makes the anxiety maybe more limited. And that way you can figure out different, essentially ways of teaching around that student. So if it's, they don't really like giving large presentations, well, if it's a group project, maybe that student can do like the work behind the presentation and someone else in their group can do the presentation. Different things like that. So it's really kind of just talking to the student, just letting them know. But I think just as a best practice in general is just addressing that you're open to talking to students about their limitations on the first day of class. And I think that just changes everything.
Anyone else? Are you tired of hearing my question? Yeah, Fernando?
I just had a question about the formalization of the accommodation request. I just understand that the university requires students to get an accommodation form from the student services office, but sometimes students like don't want to do that, like in the sense of like they tell me, oh, I have this like accommodation that I need, but then and I'm like, did you go to the student services and get it? I'm like, no. And then I mean, what would be the best way to handle that kind of situation? Just like insist that they go and get the form?
Yeah, so as a faculty member, it's completely up to you. That's the academic freedom that you all
Okay.
have. However, I say that with lots of caution. I highly recommend that you ask your students to register with the office and provide you with an accommodation letter. The only reason because if someone says, oh, I have ADHD, I need extra time for whatever reason, I need that, and you say, okay. Well, then the next student comes up and they say, oh, well, I have ADHD like him, I need extra time too, and then you say no. Well, then you can get filed for a discrimination complaint, and we don't want you anywhere near that. And so if you just say, well, if you have a disability, go speak to student access. We can get them, in the process. And sometimes, like especially right now, it takes us a while to review documentation and kind of figure out what those accommodations for students are. But I've already emailed two professors saying, hey, we're really behind right now. The student is in the process. You're welcome to, provide accommodations as you see fit. And so we're able to do that. But then you at least have some documentation behind that, the reason for working with that student. But if you strongly feel that a student needs an accommodation, you are willing, you're able to accommodate as you see fit.
Okay.
So we just recommend that you have the information from our office if it's disability related.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What if there's a student who, for whatever reason, chooses not to disclose till later in the semester after things have already been graded, things have been put in, they choose not to disclose until then, oh wait, I have this accommodation, it should have been, because there's not really a way to retroactively put that in there.
Absolutely, yeah. Accommodations aren't retroactive, and we'll always have students registering in the middle of the semester. Because a lot of times there's like a negative stigma associated with disability, sometimes students when they come to college, they don't want to register at the office right away. They want to try and do it without accommodations. And if you're at a school like Vanderbilt or, I mean, really any university setting, you know you worked your butt off to get into college. And so a lot of students are like, I'm gonna do this without accommodations. I want to have that judgment piece around it. And so a lot of times we do see students registering in the middle of the semester or like right before finals, because if they don't pass that final exam, you don't have to retake the class or whatever it may be. So if you do have a student and they're like, I should have had accommodations, and maybe as a faculty member, again, you have that academic freedom to say, well, let's see what your test looks like with accommodations, and then if it's significantly different, maybe something you want to revisit with the student. You definitely in no way have to though. Accommodations are in no way retroactive. They go from the day that you and the student talk about them and then forward. So legally, yeah, you can go that day forward. If it's something you want to consider as a faculty member for something prior, you can talk to that student about it. Just as if like their parent had passed away and they didn't do well on a test, 2 weeks ago and they want to retake that test. You have the freedom as a faculty member to decide how to handle that too. Does that answer it?
Mhm.
Okay.
Other questions? Could you tell us where your office is or how we can best get in contact with you if we need to talk to y'all?
Sure. We're in the Baker Building. We're not too far, but right on 21st and West End. Where most of our, we have 2 offices on the first floor, and our testing center is on the first floor at Baker and 108. And then 3 of our team members are up on 975, just office suites are up there. So, but everyone's in Baker.
Any other questions?
Are y'all still seeing, are you all having more integration with the Next Steps program? Are those students receiving accommodation services, I guess, in a different way, or is that similar?
Yeah,
Because
so
we're
it's
starting
it's kind of completely different. So Next Up students don't receive a Vanderbilt University degree. They're receiving like a certificate.
Mhm.
And so we work with that program in terms of providing note takers. And so that's like the accommodation. Any other accommodation after that is more so just an agreement with the instructor, because the plan that they use for when they audit the classes or when they attend the classes is it's kind of personalized as is. So they have like a writing disability. They might look at the writing assignments, and that's where it might be like, oh, they only have to do half of the writing assignment that may be there.
So they're more like individualized, like IEPs would be.
Right. And that's when the Next Step program coordinators work directly with the instructor to make sure the plan fits for the student.
Okay.
So, yeah. But we are starting to work a little bit more closely with them overall.